The Bootstrap Paradox. Imagine you're walking through an old bookstore, one of those quiet places where the scent of paper and dust blends with time itself. You reach for a worn-out volume tucked between outdated encyclopedias and forgotten science fiction. And as you flip through the pages, you see your own handwriting in the margins. But you've never owned this book before, and certainly never written in it. Still, the notes are undeniably yours. Your phrases, your style, even inside jokes only you would understand. How could this be? We don't need time travel to entertain the possibility of a loop. Often the things that challenge our understanding hide in plain sight, masquerading as oddities or coincidences. You've probably encountered moments where a thought entered your mind so precisely that you weren't sure whether you remembered it or created it. A piece of music you hummed that seemingly came from nowhere. An invention idea that you later saw already existed. Did you influence something, or did something plant itself into your mind? Now imagine a scientist named Alice. She's been working on a breakthrough in quantum optics, striving to create a device that manipulates light to transmit information faster than any known method. Late one night, after years of effort, she receives a package on her doorstep. No return address. Inside, a comprehensive technical manual detailing the exact blueprint for the device she's been trying to build. At first, she's skeptical. It could be a prank or a strange coincidence. But as she tests the diagrams, she realizes they work. The math checks out. The predictions align with her experiments. So she builds it, she refines it, she commercializes it. Years later, after she's long retired and the technology she perfected has changed the world, she reflects on how it all started, with that mysterious manual. In her final days, she places a copy of the manual into a sealed envelope, addressing it to herself, time to arrive on her doorstep all those years ago. And with that, the loop is closed. But something doesn't fit, does it? No one ever truly wrote the manual. It has no origin. It exists uncaused. It passed from Alice to her younger self in a cycle that loops endlessly. This is the essence of the Bootstrap Paradox. A logically valid feedback loop with no clear beginning. Information or objects appear out of nowhere with no identifiable creator. The name bootstrap comes from the expression pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, an impossible feat if taken literally. And yet, this paradox manages exactly that, to pull its own existence into being, unaided, unanchored to any point of creation. It's a concept that bends not just time, but sense itself. And throughout history, it has found echoes in more than just theoretical physics. There is a fascinating parallel in literature with the German writer Johann Valentin Andrea. In 1616, a mysterious text called the Asterisk Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz Asterisk was published, attributed to him. But Andrea later claimed it was merely a youthful joke. Yet that very text inspired the birth of the Rosicrucian philosophical movement and esoteric beliefs far beyond its author's intent. A fictional idea ignited a culture, which then endowed the fiction with sacred meaning. Truth born from invention, cause spawned from effect. We see it even in language. Where did the first word truly come from? If every generation learns language from the one before it, but language itself has no original teacher, how did it arise? In mathematics, Gödel's incompleteness theorems hint at self-reference too. Certain truths cannot be proven within the system they belong to. They reference themselves in a way that defies foundational logic. Just like the Bootstrap Paradox, they challenge the idea that knowledge must have a starting point. But these aren't just abstract musings. There are echoes of these loops in our real lives. Consider memory. Have you ever told a story so many times that you no longer remember the original experience, only the retelling? What if two people share that memory, reinforcing it in each other, until the event takes on a life of its own? The origin fades, but the memory persists, functionally real, influential, and yet causally ambiguous. The Bootstrap Paradox reminds us that some truths might not come from beginnings. Some ideas, technologies, or beliefs may exist within loops, sustained not by roots, but by resonance. That's what makes this one of those paradoxes you were never meant to understand. It teases the limits of our reasoning, as if to say, Not everything unfolds in a line. There's also a lesser-known symbol associated with recursion and causality loops, the Ouroboros, an ancient symbol of a serpent eating its own tail. It represents cyclicality, the eternal return, self-sustaining systems. It is neither beginning nor end, but both at once. A fitting icon for the Bootstrap Paradox. What makes this paradox especially haunting is the agency it removes. If you invent something, but only because you were given the invention by yourself, did you really invent it? Is knowledge still yours if it came from you, but only after it had already been given to you by you? It becomes more than paradox. It becomes a mirror held up to the concept of origin, pointing out that our obsession with finding the first cause, the root, the source, might be misplaced. Maybe not all things begin as we imagine. Maybe some things are suspended in existence the way melodies hang in the air, repeating, echoing, returning. In a practical sense, the Bootstrap Paradox offers an intriguing lens for creativity. Sometimes, the origin of a great idea doesn't matter as much as its transformation. Artists often cite influences they can no longer trace. Writers speak of stories that seem to write themselves. Instead of waiting for a spark, perhaps we create by acting as if the spark has already come. Leave yourself a note. Record a message for your future self. Engage in a loop of your own making, not for confusion, but for continuity. There's a subtle kind of power in doing so. It invites serendipity. It gives space for intuition to feel like memory. It allows us to inhabit that strange place where thoughts can precede themselves. After all, perhaps we don't always need to know where the path begins. Walking it might be enough. So the next time you encounter something that seems to have emerged from nowhere, a sudden insight, an unplanned coincidence, a path you never meant to walk but find yourself on nonetheless, ask not where it came from. Ask instead, what if it was always meant to be here? Because somewhere, caught in the gentle fold between past and future, lies the possibility that some questions aren't meant to be answered, only observed, only felt, and maybe, just maybe, understood, but never truly unraveled. Quantum superposition. You are sitting at your kitchen table, early in the morning, sipping coffee. The steam curls upward in quiet spirals. Outside, the world begins to stretch awake, the soft shuffle of leaves in the wind, the distant echo of a bird's song. You're alone, or so it seems. You reach for the newspaper, lift your mug, and pause for just a moment. Now consider this. What if, in another version of this morning, you reached with your left hand instead of your right? What if the steam curled a fraction differently? What if, somewhere, both versions exist at once? This is not science fiction. It is the heart of one of the most mind-bending ideas in physics, quantum superposition. On the surface, quantum superposition sounds deceptively simple. In the world of subatomic particles, electrons, photons, the foundation of all matter, something can exist in multiple states at the same time. A particle can be here and there, up and down, spinning clockwise and counterclockwise, until, crucially, it is observed. Observation collapses possibility into reality. To illustrate this, let's revisit an old, almost absurd thought experiment imagined by Erwin Schrödinger in 1935. Imagine a cat sealed in a steel box, along with a Geiger counter, a tiny bit of radioactive material, and a vial of poison set to break open if the counter detects radiation. The radioactive atom has a 50-50 chance of decaying over some fixed time frame. If it decays, the poison is released. If it doesn't, the cat lives. No one can open the box or interfere with the setup. According to quantum mechanics, until someone observes the inside of the box, the system exists in a superposition where the cat is both dead and alive. And when the box is opened, reality decides. At first glance, this seems nonsensical. Cats do not exist in half-life states. But at the quantum level, this paradox is not metaphor, it's mathematics. A real, lesser-known symbol of this paradox sits quietly in a museum in Vienna. Schrödinger's original handwritten notes, preserved in ink that has faded but never disappeared, not unlike the paradox it describes. The cat is only a translation, an exaggerated metaphor for the strange behavior of subatomic choices. Quantum superposition, when applied to electrons or other particles, is not theoretical. It's proven. In the famous double-slit experiment, individual particles are fired at a barrier with two narrow openings. If you don't observe which slit the particle passes through, a wave-like interference pattern emerges behind the wall, as if the particle has passed through both slits at once. Two possibilities, both real, until one is seen. But observe the particle, just spy on it, even gently, and the illusion collapses. The interference pattern disappears. The particle behaves as though it chose one path. Somehow, the universe responds to your attention. This is where the paradox deepens. Our classical understanding of the world, firm, predictable, binary, fractures beneath quantum logic. Our senses tell us one story, but the mathematics says something else entirely. Why should mere observation alter reality? You might be tempted to believe it's a flaw in the tools we use to measure the world. But the math doesn't go away. It's written into nature's fabric. In the equations of quantum mechanics, a system remains in superposition until its wave function collapses. But what causes that collapse? A detector? A human eye? Consciousness itself? These are not questions with simple answers. In fact, they edge into the very soul of the topic. Paradoxes you were never meant to understand. Quantum superposition defies intuition because it tells us that at a fundamental level, reality is not composed of fixed certainties, but of probabilities, suspended potential. It's not until a measurement occurs that outcomes solidify. The universe may not be a clockwork machine, but an unfolding poem, sensitive to even the act of watching. This strange idea found footing in quantum computing. In traditional computers, bits exist in one of two states, 0 or 1. But quantum bits, qubits, can exist in both states simultaneously, exponentially expanding computing power. A single qubit does not carry binary instructions. It carries a cloud of probability. The entire shape of computation shifts. From the quiet confines of a lab where atomic ions dance under lasers, to multinational firms racing to harness this strange power, superposition is no longer theoretical lore. It is engineering reality. You might ask, how does this touch our lives? In more ways than you think. Consider decision-making. Quantum superposition hints at a world of coexisting possibilities, choices not yet made. Psychologists have even investigated whether cognitive states mimic quantum behaviors. For instance, a person considering two choices might mentally hold both in a kind of emotional superposition before deciding. Whether symbolic or literal, it reflects how human experience flows not in straight lines, but in clouds of uncertainty. An actionable takeaway? Embrace uncertainty. In choice, creativity, or reflection, learning to sit with competing possibilities before rushing to resolve them will give you a deeper view. Reality itself, at its core, does not rush to decide. It waits. It spans multiple paths, and only when the moment calls upon it does it choose a shape. Ancient Eastern philosophy has long pointed to such ideas. In the Zen tradition, the concept of mu is used when a question contains incorrect assumptions. If asked, is the cat alive or dead? The answer might be mu. Unask the question. The paradox is not just in the answer, it's in the way we frame the question. In that sense, quantum superposition does not just twist the laws of physics, it invites us to unlearn the law of binary thinking. So here we are, morning coffee in hand. The bird sings outside your window, and deep beneath your everyday routine, particles continue their dance of maybe this and maybe that. Everything, and yet nothing fixed, as if the world is not a sum of things, but a field of becoming. And perhaps it always has been. What if the future isn't built out of decisions already made, but of shimmering possibilities, waiting to be seen? That's the quiet beauty of quantum superposition. And maybe, just maybe, it was never meant to be fully understood. The paradox of identity. On a quiet morning, You wake up and shuffle to the mirror. You look at the reflection. Familiar, yet somehow different. Maybe your hair has changed. Maybe your thoughts feel new. But without question, you say to yourself, "This is me." It's such an automatic recognition, so deeply rooted, that questioning it feels strange. And yet, when we try to define what that me truly is, something odd begins to happen. The ground beneath the self begins to quietly shift. Consider this. Throughout your entire life, your body is constantly changing. Old cells die, new cells take their place. By some estimates, nearly every cell in your body is replaced every 7 to 10 years. The neurons in your brain, the very contents of your thoughts, remain largely the same in quantity, but the patterns in which they connect do not. Memories fade, beliefs evolve. If your physical matter and even your personality are in flux, then how can the you from 10 years ago be the same you now? This line of thinking is old enough to be inscribed in the works of Plato and passed along through centuries of philosophy. One of the most famous versions is known as the ship of Theseus. The story goes like this. There's a ship, a grand vessel, preserved in a museum. Over the years, one by one, its parts are replaced as they wear out. A rotting plank is swapped for a new one. A sail is repaired. Eventually, every single piece of the ship has been changed. And yet, it stands in the same place, under the same name, the ship of Theseus. Is it still the same ship? The question gets stranger. Suppose someone took all the old pieces that had been removed, the worn wood, the aged ropes, and reassembled them elsewhere into a second ship. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? The fully restored, perfectly maintained museum piece? Or the weathered, original material reconstruction? This paradox, ancient as it may seem, echoes loudly in modern thought. In the realm of biology, we see it mirrored in the concept of regenerative identity. Some jellyfish species, like Turritopsis dohrnii, are biologically immortal. They revert to earlier life stages, regenerate, and begin the cycle again. Their essence persists, even as their bodies transform. But what is that essence? Philosophically, identity seems to require continuity. But what kind? Continuity of memory, of body, of narrative? And what happens when that narrative breaks? In the case of severe amnesia, a person may lose all recollection of who they are, their name, history, even preferences. They may forge a new sense of self from scratch. Are they still the same person? Legally, perhaps. Physically, certainly. But internally, spiritually, are they? Or did the former self end when the memory did? This dilemma exists not in the clouds of theory, but alongside us every day. Consider a more common scenario. A person undergoes profound life change. Perhaps they overcome addiction, leave behind a long-held belief, or emerge from trauma completely transformed. They say, "I'm not the same person I was." And in many ways, they're right. That earlier self might feel like a distant stranger. In psychology, this is called narrative identity. We are the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. And yet, those stories are revised constantly. Day by day, we rewrite ourselves, sometimes in subtle edits, other times in sweeping revisions. So if the self is a story, who is the storyteller? In Eastern philosophy, particularly within the teachings of Zen Buddhism, there's a different approach. The self is not a solid, unchanging thing, but an illusion, an ever-shifting constellation of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions. The Japanese concept of mu, which translates to nothingness, points toward this. Not emptiness as in absence, but a boundless space where fixed identity is dissolved. In the classic Zen koan, a monk asks whether a dog has Buddha nature. The master replies mu. It doesn't answer the question. It unasks it. The paradox of identity is not just philosophical. It carries ripples into everyday life. When you think about who you are, what anchors do you reach for? Is it your job, your relationships, your memories? Here's a simple, actionable way to explore this in real time. Pick one habit you deeply associate with your identity. Say, being an organized person. For 1 week, deliberately act against type. Be messy. Resist structure. Watch how your inner narrative reacts. Does your sense of self cling to its old form, or does it begin to flex and shift? The answer likely won't be clear, and that's the point. The paradox of identity is about embracing multiplicity. It's recognizing that you are not a fixed point, but a moving wave. Not a solid object, but a pattern. A song with no final verse. In mathematics, a similar idea arises in the concept of fractals, shapes that contain versions of themselves within themselves, endlessly repeating, yet never the same. The Mandelbrot set, named after mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot, is one such fractal. Zoom in endlessly, and you keep finding echoes of the original shape, swirling, mutating, dancing. Just like identity, it is infinite, self-reflecting, and undefinable at any single level of detail. Paradoxes you were never meant to understand are not mistakes. They are mirrors, reflecting the limitations of logic and the vastness that lies just beyond it. We want our identities to be pristine islands, bordered and labeled. But more often, they are like rivers, never stepping in the same water twice, yet always called by the same name. So before you decide too confidently who you are, pause. Remember the ship of Theseus. Remember the jellyfish that lives again. Recall the midnight self who does not feel like the morning one. And ask, if everything can change, does anything remain? Or perhaps the better question is, do we need it to? The Sleeping Beauty Paradox. Imagine arriving at a hotel for a short getaway. A weekend retreat, nothing extravagant. You check in, leave your bags on the bed, and fall into a warm slumber. The next morning, you wake up to soft sunlight filtering through sheer curtains. No alarm, no noise, just the stillness of morning. But as you sit up and stretch, you begin to wonder, is it Saturday or Sunday? Did you sleep through a day? The room looks the same, of course. The air smells unchanged, and there's no note, no clock, no clue. All you know is that it feels like morning, and everything around you tells you nothing more. Now imagine that you hadn't simply lost track of time in a hotel room, but were instead placed in a controlled experiment, intentionally put to sleep, knowing that at some point you'll awaken, but not knowing when or how often. Welcome to the Sleeping Beauty Paradox. It's a thought experiment that asks a simple yet mind-bending question. When you wake up, what should you believe about the chance that a specific event, say a coin flip, turned out a certain way? Here's how it works. Sleeping Beauty agrees to participate in a scientific study. On Sunday evening, she is told that a fair coin will be flipped. If the coin lands heads, she will be awakened on Monday only, and then the study ends. But if the coin lands tails, she will be awakened on Monday and again on Tuesday. To prevent her from knowing when she is awake, she is given a drug after each waking that erases her memory of it. In other words, when she wakes up, she never knows whether it's Monday or Tuesday, and she doesn't know how many times she has already woken up. Now comes the central question of the paradox. When she opens her eyes and finds herself awake, without any memory of the days before, what should she believe is the probability that the coin landed heads? This is where intuition begins to fracture. At first glance, most people feel the answer should be straightforward. The coin was fair. Heads and tails are equally likely, so shouldn't the chance be 50%? But others argue that this misses something vital. Think of it this way. If the coin comes up heads, Sleeping Beauty is awakened once. If it comes up tails, she is awakened twice. From her perspective, there are two ways to wake up in the tails scenario, but only one way in the heads scenario. So if she wakes up and doesn't know what day it is, some suggest she should think the chance of heads is only 1/3 and that tails is 2/3. These positions have names. The first is the Halfer view, 50% for heads. The second is the Thirder view, 1/3 for heads, 2/3 for tails. Here's the unsettling part. Each argument seems airtight when taken on its own. The Halfer focuses on the fairness of the coin. Nothing you learn by waking up, they say, changes the prior odds. The Thirder, on the other hand, considers the number of ways Beauty could find herself awake and whether each of those wakings should count equally. We're not talking science fiction here. No wormholes, no magical loops, just a coin, a schedule, and a room with no windows. And yet our intuition stumbles. Even philosophers and statisticians argue about the correct answer. Bayesian reasoning leans gently toward the third solution, because it accounts for how often beauty would expect to find herself in each type of situation. But the Hafer response reminds us that without new information, our original probabilities should stand. The paradox delicately sits in this tension. This is one of the paradoxes you were never meant to understand. Not entirely, because it does something subtle. It reveals the difference between subjective uncertainty and objective chance, between how the world is and how you experience it. It whispers to the flaws in our reasoning not through trickery, but through simplicity. In ancient Sufi tales, there's the symbol of the Zulfikar, a bifurcated sword, said to belong to Ali, the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad. The sword is often depicted as split at the tip, two paths diverging from one. It became a metaphor for justice, but also for the balancing of dual truths. The Sleeping Beauty paradox is a modern Zulfikar. One thought becomes two, and each blade cuts differently. In daily life, the paradox offers something quiet and profound. Think about when you make decisions without full information. When you wake up unsure about the day ahead, or when you're faced with a situation you've already dealt with, perhaps many times. The memoryless nature of waking in the paradox echoes our own forgetfulness, our routines, and the many mornings that blur together. How often do we make confident judgments without realizing how our perspective distorts the odds? One actionable insight is this. Next time you assess a risk or take a chance, pause to consider not just the event itself, but how often you might find yourself in similar situations. If your mornings always feel the same, does that make your guesses about the day more accurate or less? If every traffic jam feels like a surprise, is it the road's fault or an expectation neglected? The paradox won't answer these for you, but it invites you to sit with the uncertainty instead of racing to resolve it. It's not about getting to the right answer. It's about realizing how the framing of a question changes what we consider possible. The next time you open your eyes and confront a moment that feels familiar yet uncertain, remember Sleeping Beauty. She is neither foolish nor asleep in the metaphorical sense. She simply exists in a space where knowledge is fragmented, and where even sincerity can't always tell you the truth. Does she wake up on Monday? On Tuesday? Does it matter? And more importantly, what would you believe if you were her? Perhaps it's not about solving the paradox at all. Perhaps it's about seeing where your reasoning begins to bend and quietly wondering why. Some paradoxes are made to be resolved. Others, like this one, are soft echoes in the halls of logic, paradoxes you were never meant to understand. And sometimes, the most honest answer is to simply live with the question. Time loop paradox. Imagine waking up one morning with an urgent task. You glance at the clock. 7:45 a.m. You're already late. In a rush, you grab your bag, hustle out the door, and slam it behind you, only to realize you left your keys inside. You groan, retrace your steps, and try the doorknob just in case. It's locked, just as expected. Frustrated, you look up and see the clock on the street corner. It reads 7:45 a.m. again, the exact same time. Not 1 second passed. You pause. Somewhere under layers of habit and hurry, a quiet thought stirs. What if you've been here before? Not metaphorically, but truly. What if time itself has formed a loop around this very moment? You second-guess yourself, shake it off, and continue your day. But you can't shake the sense that something didn't sequence correctly. In real life, clocks tick forward. We measure time using quartz vibrations, the oscillation of atomic particles, the rotation of Earth. Seconds pass, turn into minutes, and drift into hours. Time, as we know it, flows in one linear direction, from past through present to future. But physics doesn't demand this. In fact, some interpretations of general relativity suggest time is not a river, but a landscape, and landscapes can loop. This brings us into the strange territory of the time loop paradox. A time loop, in conceptual terms, is a sequence in which events repeat over and over, potentially infinitely, with no true origin point. But this isn't just the stuff of surreal dreams or science fiction films. The possibility of time loops arises naturally from Einstein's theory of general relativity. In 1949, the logician Kurt Gödel, famous for his incompleteness theorems, discovered a solution to Einstein's equations describing a rotating universe. This peculiar solution made closed time-like curves possible. A closed time-like curve, or CTC, is a path through space-time that loops back onto itself. You could, in theory, travel through it and arrive at the same event from which you started. This isn't just a circle in space, it's a circle in time. And here's where the paradox begins to take root. Suppose someone uses this loop to go back in time and hands a scientist a detailed set of blueprints for a revolutionary device. The scientist builds the device, improves on it, and then, years later, travels back in time and becomes the very person who gives the blueprints to their younger self. The object, the device, has no origin. It exists in the loop, causally consistent but uncreated. This is known as the Bootstrap Paradox. Like a snake swallowing its own tail, the Ouroboros, this paradox implies that an object, or information, can exist without ever having been created. It was never invented. It simply was. You begin to see why this is one of those paradoxes you were never meant to understand. But the implications reach deeper. Let's say you could identify such a loop in the laws of our universe. Would it mean that some information, the laws themselves, perhaps, never had a beginning? Could our very reality be built, at least in part, on a causality that is circular rather than linear? The human mind strains to accept this. We expect causes to precede effects, reasons to drive results. But time, at its core, may not share this expectation. Interestingly, something akin to closed loops appears in nature in smaller, indirect ways. In quantum mechanics, there are processes where particles can influence their past selves through a nested pattern of timelines that remain mathematically consistent. The physicist David Deutsch proposed a version where quantum states remain self-consistent even when traveling through CTCs. Under these conditions, paradoxes such as the grandfather paradox, where one might prevent their own existence, are avoided not because they're impossible, but because the universe refuses to allow inconsistencies. It's as though the loop edits itself to enforce continuity. In classical computing, researchers experiment with hypothetical time travel circuits, concepts not built for sci-fi shows, but as tools to challenge and understand computation's limits. A logic gate that can send information back to its past input, a time loop gate, could, in theory, solve problems that are unsolvable within linear time. The paradox becomes a kind of power. But what does this mean for us, living beings tethered tightly to linear clocks? Time loops manifest symbolically, if not physically, in our behaviors, routines, and choices. Have you ever noticed how your worries, your habits, your thoughts spiral? You make a choice, the outcome disappoints, and you find yourself making the same choice again. There is a deeper metaphor in the loop. The way we seem drawn to certain repetitions not because of fate, but because we never detect the starting point of what causes them. In the Tibetan Buddhist symbol of the endless knot, lines weave into one another with no discernible beginning or end. It represents samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, but also interdependence. In many traditions, time is not an arrow, but a wheel. What appears paradoxical to a Western scientific mind may, in another cultural lens, be harmony. We were never meant to fully comprehend that something can be its own cause. And yet, life presents us with situations that resonate with this logic. Inspiration strikes from nowhere. An idea you've never seen before forms in your mind, clear and whole. You write it down, test it, even speak of it as true, only to later find it in an old letter or a forgotten book on your shelf. Did you remember it? Or did it enter the loop of thought without origin? Such mysteries do not demand resolution, but we can respond. You can start by noticing the psychological loops in your own life. Identify one habit that seems to reset again and again, despite your plans to break it. Observe the moment just before the loop restarts. That pause is your anchor. It's the closest you'll come, perhaps, to stepping outside the loop, to turn observation into change. The time loop paradox isn't just theoretical. It invites us to observe causality more closely, to distrust the easy story of beginning, middle, and end. In storytelling, Borges captured this eloquently. In his story, The Garden of Forking Paths, time branches, not marches. Every decision creates an alternate timeline, possible yet unseen. And when some branch circles back to its root, the loop becomes not a prison, but a mirror. Not every paradox needs solving. Some paradoxes exist simply to broaden our minds, to invite disquieting insight into the architecture of reality itself. They are experiences in logic, not meant to be conquered but contemplated. Perhaps that's why, in physics and in philosophy alike, time loop discussions often drift into silence. We do not lack mathematical scaffolding. We lack intuition capable of understanding structures that are radically nonlinear and yet orderly. After all, how do you find the origin of something that lies in a circle? The temptation is always to look for a source, a cause, before the cause. But in a loop, the question, what came first, loses meaning. Everything holds something else up. Reality becomes a self-supporting ring. And so, as we glance at the ticking clock, we must remember, what we call time might only be the way we experience change, not its container. Maybe time isn't separate from events at all. Maybe it is the pattern binding them. In that sense, perhaps our understanding of time loops isn't supposed to be an answer, but a humbling. A gentle reminder that not all mysteries were built to be unlocked. Some were placed before us simply to be felt. And as you live another day, repeating some of the same scenes, think, quietly, what moment you might be looping through, and whether you've been here before, watching the clock, or if the clock is watching you. The information paradox. Imagine standing at the edge of a library. Not a library with shelves and books, but one that exists inside your phone, your mind, or even the universe itself. Every second, we create and exchange information. Texts, memories, DNA sequences, digital photos, ancient scrolls. Information surrounds us, shapes us, defines us. It seems indestructible. When you delete a picture, it still lingers in fragments on a hard disk. When you forget a memory, your neurons may still hold traces. In science, this concept is sacred. Information cannot be lost. But then, we look up. Hovering above the Earth are the cold, black hearts of the cosmos, black holes. Invisible, inescapable, silent. If you throw your phone into a black hole, it vanishes past the event horizon, never to return. If you drop the entire Library of Alexandria into a black hole, the words, the thoughts, the scrolls, all of it, would be absorbed. You might assume the information is buried, compressed perhaps, hidden inside, until a chilling realization sets in. According to classical physics, black holes erase everything. This is where the paradox begins. The information paradox was first sharpened into focus by Stephen Hawking in the 1970s. Using quantum mechanics combined with general relativity, he showed that black holes aren't completely black. They emit a faint glow, now called Hawking radiation. But here is the problem. This radiation appears to be random. It carries no code, no structure. It tells you nothing about what fell in. And slowly, over trillions of years, it allows a black hole to evaporate entirely, leaving behind nothing. So where did the information go? In physics, there's a law, one of the most sacred, that information is conserved. You can shred a document and burn the scraps, but in theory, the atoms and energies rearrange. With enough detail, you could trace it backwards, like a story told backward in perfect clarity. If a black hole destroys information, it violates this law. A paradox is born. Here we are, caught between two of our best theories. Quantum mechanics screams that information must survive. General relativity calmly suggests it disappears inside the singularity. And yet, both theories have passed every test we've thrown at them. So when one leads to contradiction, we are left in a kind of intellectual vertigo. In mathematics, Gödel's incompleteness theorem tells us that any rich enough logical system contains truths that cannot be proven within the system. The universe, it seems, has its own version of this, a whisper that some realities are beyond resolution. This is one of those paradoxes you were never meant to understand, not because we are incapable, but because nature itself may be conflicted. But physicists are not content to leave such a question unanswered. Proposed resolutions have ranged from the arcane to the radical. Some believe information bleeds out in the Hawking radiation, but is so subtly entangled that we have not yet learned how to decode it. Others imagine that the information is smeared on the event horizon, preserved in a thin, null layer like cosmic ink in invisible letters. An idea called the holographic principle. A lesser-known symbol of this mystery comes from string theory, an object called the fuzzball. These fuzzballs are not singularity-based black holes at all, but tangled, vibrating strings that occupy the space where the black hole would be. In this theory, nothing disappears. Every particle and photon rests inside the strands, but we cannot yet see or test this. Still, others suggest the black hole might not be the end, but a door, possibly leading information somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond space-time as we know it. And yet, the practical mind asks, what does this have to do with me? After all, you are unlikely to fall into a black hole. But the principles at stake ripple through your daily life. Every time you struggle to recover a lost file, worry about your digital footprint, trace back events in memory, you dance at the edge of this paradox. Information may seem like a fragile thing, but if it truly cannot be destroyed, then what you say, write, think, perhaps even feel imprints on reality in complex ways. In a sense, we are all walking archives. We consume and generate information through every interaction. We contribute to the grand computation of the cosmos. Data scientists have even begun to model consciousness as a form of information processing. Buddhists once described the self not as a fixed identity, but a flow of cause and effect. A stream, not a statue. Perhaps then, even your quietest thoughts echo somewhere in the fabric of space-time. So what are the pragmatic steps, the touchable angles of this intangible paradox? One is caution. Our digital age thrives on data. What you share is rarely forgotten. It may fade, but just like particles entering a black hole, it often leaves a trace in ways we do not fully understand. Consider your information as a kind of gravity. It has pull, reach, and weight. Another is wonder. The sheer fact that minds across centuries are trying to track lost particles through dead stars reminds us that knowledge has no fixed boundary. When you write, speak, create, you contribute, not to silence, but to a symphony too vast and subtle for immediate hearing. When you press delete, ask yourself, did it vanish, or did it scatter like stardust somewhere? The information paradox has not been solved. Not completely. It remains a riddle woven into the architecture of the cosmos. It quietly mocks our desire for closure, for clarity. And yet, it also invites us into a deeper kind of understanding, the kind that does not end with an answer, but with a question. If everything leaves a trace, then what kind of universe are we really living in? And more importantly, what kind of story are you quietly telling it? Perhaps not all truths were meant to be held. Some were meant to drift, to haunt, to remain.